This is a place of learning, Miss Thompson, not a cultural showcase. Either you fix that hair or you can leave my classroom.
This is a place of learning, Miss Thompson, not a cultural showcase. Either you fix that hair or you can leave my classroom. The words hung in the air like poison. 16-year-old Amara Thompson sat frozen at her desk, her hands trembling as every single pair of eyes in that classroom turned to stare at her. The beads in her carefully styled bantu knots caught the fluorescent light as her head bowed slightly under the weight of humiliation. Mr. Derek Morrison stood over her, arms crossed, waiting for her response with the kind of smugness that comes from 15 years of unchecked authority. But here's what he didn't know. In exactly 24 hours his career would be over. His reputation destroyed. And the power he wielded so carelessly in that moment? Gone. Let me tell you how we got here. It started on a Monday morning at 6:45 a.m., in a modest two-bedroom apartment on the south side. Amara sat at her small vanity mirror, her fingers moving with practiced precision through her natural hair. Each section was carefully twisted, shaped into beautiful bantu knots that would have made her ancestors proud. And threaded through those knots were wooden beads, each one hand-carved, each one carrying a story. These weren't just accessories. They were heirlooms, passed down from her grandmother before she died 2 years earlier. Amara's reflection showed a young woman who understood the weight of legacy. Her grandmother had sat her down when she was just 8 years old, braiding her hair with gentle hands, and told her something she'd never forgotten. Your hair is your crown, baby girl. Don't ever let anyone make you ashamed of it. It connects you to everyone who came before you and everyone who'll come after. As Amara secured the last bead, her 12-year-old brother Marcus appeared in her doorway, backpack already slung over his shoulder, ready for his own school day. He watched his sister for a moment, then smiled that gap-toothed grin that always made her feel better. You look like a queen, he said simply. And he meant it. Their mother, Diana Thompson, rushed past in her nurse's scrubs, already running late for the first of 2 back-to-back shifts at County General. She paused just long enough to kiss Amara's forehead, her eyes tired but full of pride. She didn't say it out loud, but Amara knew what that look meant. Her mother had sacrificed everything to get her daughter into Westridge Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in the state. The scholarship covered tuition, but it didn't cover the feeling of not quite belonging. Amara was a junior now. She maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA, served as captain of the debate team, and spent her evenings dreaming of becoming a civil rights attorney. She'd mapped out her entire future. Graduate top of her class, full ride to a top university law school, then back to her community to fight for people who looked like her, who sounded like her, who needed someone who understood. But every morning when she walked through those iron gates at Westridge, she felt it. That invisible barrier between her and the legacy students, the ones whose grandparents had gone there, whose names were on buildings and scholarship funds. She'd written about it in her journal just the night before. Day 127 at Westridge. Still feels like I'm proving I belong here. She had no idea how prophetic those words would become. Now let's talk about Mr. Derek Morrison. 42 years old, AP history teacher, 15-year veteran of Westridge Academy. To look at him, you'd see exactly what the school administration saw. A polished professional who wore expensive suits, drove a luxury sedan, and had a framed photograph in his classroom of himself shaking hands with the mayor. He was Westridge royalty himself, an alumnus whose family legacy stretched back 3 generations. The Morrison name meant something at that school. That particular Monday morning, he stood in the teacher's lounge, coffee in hand, holding court with a few colleagues. Principal Kenneth Hutchinson clapped him on the shoulder, praising his latest lesson plan on post-war American prosperity. Derek smiled that confident smile, the one that came from never having to question his place in the world. He made a comment, casual and seemingly harmless, about maintaining standards and preserving the way things used to be. A few teachers nodded along. But across the room, Ms. Rivera, a younger Latina teacher who'd only been at Westridge for 2 years, shifted uncomfortably. She'd heard these kinds of comments from Derek before. The way he talked about certain students. The way his voice changed when he discussed the scholarship program that had brought in more students of color. But Ms. Rivera, like so many others, said nothing. Because Derek Morrison was untouchable. Or so everyone thought. Second period arrived. IPUS history. Amara walked into that classroom with her head held high, her beads clicking softly with each step. She took her usual seat in the front row because that's where serious students sit, and Amara Thompson was nothing if not serious. She pulled out her notebook, her color-coded pens already arranged, ready to take the meticulous notes that had earned her that perfect GPA. Mr. Morrison began the lesson, and here's where the irony becomes almost unbearable. The topic of the day? The civil rights movement. He stood at the front of the class talking about Rosa Parks, about the Montgomery bus boycott, about people who fought against discrimination and injustice. His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of someone who'd taught this material 100 times before. But then he paused, mid-sentence. His eyes had landed on Amara and more specifically on her hair. Those beautiful bantu knots, those precious beads. You could see something shift in his expression. His jaw tightened slightly. The lesson continued, but now there was an edge to his voice. "Miss Thompson," he said, not looking directly at her, "I need to speak with you after class about your appearance." The words cut through the classroom like a knife. Conversation stopped. Pencils paused mid-note. 23 students suddenly found themselves holding their breath. Amara's confusion was written all over her face. Her appearance? She checked the dress code that morning like she did every morning. Navy blazer, white-collared shirt, plaid skirt at regulation length. Everything was exactly as it should be. Next to her, her best friend Jessica Chin, another scholarship student who understood what it felt like to be different at Westridge, reached over and squeezed Amara's hand under the desk. A silent message of solidarity. But Mr. Morrison had already moved on, continuing his lecture about civil rights and equality and justice as if he hadn't just singled out the only black girl in his front row. Except now, every few minutes his eyes would drift back to Amara. And each time they did, his expression showed barely concealed disapproval. The tension in that room built with every passing minute. Students exchanged glances. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked uncomfortable. A few looked away entirely, grateful it wasn't them. When the bell finally rang 45 minutes later, it felt like a release of pressure. Students gathered their books slowly, too slowly because everyone knew something was about to happen and nobody wanted to miss it. They filed toward the door, but several lingered just outside in the hallway, close enough to hear. Amara approached Mr. Morrison's desk, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Mr. Morrison, you wanted to see me?" He didn't look up from the papers he was shuffling, a power play that Amara recognized immediately. When he finally raised his eyes to meet hers, his expression was one of condescending patience, the look you give a child who's being intentionally difficult. "Amara," he began, his tone dripping with false concern, "you're a bright student. One of our brightest scholarship recipients, in fact. But this school has standards. Before we continue, I need to ask you something. Have you ever been treated differently because of how you naturally look? Drop your answer in the comments below, because what happened next is going to make your blood boil." He continued, gesturing vaguely at her hair. "Your hairstyle is distracting and unprofessional. This isn't the place for political statements." Political statements? Amara's shock was genuine, her voice rising slightly despite her attempt to stay calm. "This is just my natural hair, sir." Derek Morrison leaned back in his chair, and here's where his true colors started to show. "Don't play naive with me," he said, his voice harder now. "Those beads, that style, it's inappropriate for an academic environment. This is Westridge Academy, not?" He trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Jessica Chin, who'd been hovering near the doorway, felt her stomach drop. Slowly, carefully, she pulled out her phone and started recording. Her hands were shaking, but she kept the camera steady, pointed at Mr. Morrison's desk. Amara's voice was shaking now too, but not with fear. With the dawning realization of what was actually happening. "Sir, there's nothing in the dress code about natural black hairstyles. I checked this morning. I check every morning." Morrison stood up, his full height now towering over her, using his physical presence to intimidate. His voice grew louder, carrying into the hallway where more students had started to gather. "I'm not going to debate this with you, Miss Thompson. Either come back tomorrow looking appropriate, or you'll be marked absent from my class. Understood?" Outside, whispers spread like wildfire. Phones appeared. Messages were sent. What's happening? Is Morrison really doing this? Several students pulled out their own phones, documenting what they could see and hear. Amara felt tears forming, burning at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not in front of him. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, but every word was clear. "This is discrimination." And that's when Derek Morrison said the words that would end his career. He looked at this brilliant, accomplished young woman, this 16-year-old girl who'd done nothing wrong except exist in her natural state, and he said, "This is a place of learning, Miss Thompson, not a cultural showcase. You're dismissed." The finality in his voice, the absolute certainty that he was right and she was wrong, that his authority was unquestionable, it shattered something inside Amara. She grabbed her bag, books spilling slightly in her haste, and rushed toward the door. Students parted for her, their faces showing everything from sympathy to shock to shame. Jessica stopped recording, her face frozen in horror at what she'd just witnessed. She looked down at her phone, at the video that had captured everything, and knew in her gut that something had to be done. Amara didn't stop walking until she reached the girls' bathroom on the second floor, the one that was usually empty during third period. She pushed into a stall, locked the door, and finally let the tears come. Silent, streaming down her face. Her hands reached up to touch the beads in her hair, those precious gifts from her grandmother. Each wooden sphere felt like a reminder of every strong woman who'd come before her, and yet in that moment, Amara had never felt more small. She'd worked so hard. Studied until midnight most nights. Raised her hand in every class. Smiled politely at microaggressions. Ignored the subtle exclusions. Proved herself over and over again. And still it wasn't enough. Her natural hair, the crown her grandmother had taught her to love, was being called a distraction. Inappropriate. A political statement. As she sat there, crying silently in that bathroom stall, her fingers running over those smooth wooden beads, Amara had no idea that Jessica's video was already being uploaded. She had no idea that in less than 24 hours, millions of people would know her name. She had no idea that the man who just humiliated her was about to face the reckoning of his life. All she knew in that moment was pain. And the question that every person of color who's faced discrimination knows too well: what did I do wrong? The answer, of course, was nothing. Absolutely nothing. But the world was about to make sure Derek Morrison understood that. If you believe that students deserve to show up as their authentic selves without fear of discrimination, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Amara wasn't alone in that bathroom for long. The door swung open and Jessica Chin rushed in, her face flushed with worry and anger. She found Amara in the last stall, and without a word, wrapped her arms around her best friend. Behind Jessica came two more students. Trinity Washington, a senior with box braids that fell past her shoulders, and Zoe Mitchell, a freshman whose voice still carried the warm cadence of her Atlanta hometown. These three young women had something in common beyond their friendship. They all knew exactly what Amara was feeling because they'd felt it too. Trinity knelt down beside Amara, her own eyes glistening. "Last year," she said quietly, "he told me my box braids were gang-related. I was too scared to report it. I didn't want to lose my scholarship. I didn't want to be labeled as difficult. So I took them out and straightened my hair for 3 months until I couldn't stand looking in the mirror anymore." Zoe, just 14 years old, nodded. "He said my accent was unprofessional when I gave a presentation in his class," she whispered. "I'm from Atlanta. That's just how I talk. I spent 2 weeks practicing a different accent, trying to sound more like the other students. My mama didn't raise me to be ashamed of where I'm from, but he made me feel like I had to choose between my voice and my grade." The weight of their stories hung in that small bathroom. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern. Derek Morrison had been doing this for years, targeting student after student, knowing they were too afraid to speak up, too worried about their futures to fight back. Jessica pulled out her phone, her hand still trembling slightly. "I recorded it," she said. "I got everything he said to you." Her finger hovered over the screen. "But I need your permission before I do anything with this." Amara looked at the phone, then at the three faces surrounding her. Fear warred with anger in her chest. "What if this makes things worse?" she asked, her voice thick with tears. "What if I lose my scholarship? What if they expel me? My mom worked so hard to get me here." Trinity took Amara's hand the same way Jessica had done in class. "What if the next girl doesn't have witnesses?" she said firmly. "What if the next girl is alone? Amara, you have proof. You have documentation. That's more than the rest of us ever had." Outside that bathroom, Westridge Academy was already beginning to fracture. Text messages flew between students. Screenshots of conversations were shared. The incident spread through the student body like electricity through water. In group chats, in whispered conversations between classes, in the cafeteria during lunch, everyone was talking about what Morrison had done. And here's where it got complicated. Because not everyone saw it the same way. Some white students immediately recognized the discrimination for what it was. They'd watched Amara excel for 2 years, seen her brilliance, and knew this was wrong. But others grew defensive. "Morrison's a good teacher," some said. "He's strict with everyone. Maybe she was being too sensitive. You're making this about race when it's not." Those divisions, those fault lines that had always existed beneath the surface at Westridge, were about to crack wide open. By the time Amara got home that afternoon, she'd made a decision, though she didn't quite know what it was yet. She walked through the door of their small apartment, trying to compose herself, trying to hide the red eyes and the weight pressing on her chest. But Marcus took one look at his sister and knew. He was 12, but he wasn't naive. He'd grown up black in America. He understood. What happened? He demanded, his young voice hard with protective anger. Amara tried to smile, tried to brush it off, but the moment she opened her mouth, everything came spilling out. The confrontation. Morrison's words. The way he'd stood over her desk. The humiliation in front of her entire class. The other students staring. As she spoke, Marcus's hands clenched into fists, his whole body tensing with the kind of rage that comes from watching someone you love be hurt and not being able to do anything about it. "We should tell Mom," he said immediately, his voice rising. But Amara shook her head, exhaustion written across her face. "Mom has enough to worry about, Marcus. She's working a double shift at the hospital. She's doing everything she can just to keep us fed and in that school. She picks up extra shifts so I can afford the books they require, the uniform, the field trips. I can't put this on her. Not yet." She walked to her room, sat at her vanity, and stared at her reflection. The same reflection that had looked back at her with such confidence that morning now seemed different. Smaller. The beads in her hair, those precious gifts from her grandmother, suddenly felt heavy. Her fingers reached up, fumbling with the first one, ready to take them all out. Ready to make herself smaller. Acceptable. Safe. Marcus appeared in the doorway, and when he saw what she was doing, his voice cracked with emotion. "Grandma gave you those. She said they connect you to your ancestors." And just like that, Amara was 8 years old again, sitting between her grandmother's knees on a Sunday afternoon as gentle, weathered hands braided her hair. The scent of coconut oil filled their old living room. Her grandmother's voice, warm and strong like honey and steel mixed together, had said words that Amara had carried with her ever since. "Baby girl, your hair tells a story. Every coil, every curl, it's a testament to everyone who came before you. Your great-great-grandmother, she was brought here on a ship, in chains. But even then, they braided each other's hair as an act of resistance. As a way to hold on to who they were. They survived the Middle Passage. They survived slavery. They survived Jim Crow and segregation and people telling them they weren't good enough, smart enough, beautiful enough. And they did it without ever letting go of who they were. These beads? Her grandmother had held up the wooden pieces, each one carved by hand. They're not just pretty things. They're a reminder that you come from strength. You come from warriors. You come from queens. Don't ever let anyone make you ashamed of that. Don't ever let anyone convince you that you need to be smaller to fit into their world. You make the world expand to fit you." Amara's hands dropped from her hair. She looked at her brother through the mirror, seeing the fear and hope mixed in his young face. "You're right," she said softly, her voice gaining strength. "I'm not taking them out." Instead, she opened her laptop. And she started researching. Hours passed. Amara dove deep into civil rights law, into discrimination cases, into state legislation. Her eyes scanned article after article, case after case. And that's when she found it. The Crown Act. Create a respectful and open world for natural hair. A law specifically designed to protect people from exactly what had happened to her today. She read the text carefully, her heart beginning to pound. And here's the part that changed everything. Her state had passed it 8 months ago. 8 months. Discrimination based on natural hair texture and protective hairstyles wasn't just against school policy. It wasn't just morally wrong. It was illegal. State law. Derek Morrison hadn't just humiliated her. He'd broken the law. Amara sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She had the law on her side. She had witnesses. She had documentation. For the first time since she'd walked out of Morrison's classroom, she felt something other than shame and fear. She felt power. But across town, in a very different kind of home, Derek Morrison was having a very different kind of evening. His townhouse was the kind of place that screamed success. Marble countertops, hardwood floors, artwork that cost more than some people's cars. He sat in his living room with a glass of expensive red wine, his tie loosened, scrolling through his phone with casual disinterest. His wife Catherine walked in from her home office, still in her business casual attire from her marketing job. She'd had a long day too, but she could read her husband's mood. "How was your day?" she asked, settling onto the couch beside him. Derek took a sip of wine, waving his hand dismissively. "Had to put a student in her place today. These kids think they can do whatever they want. No respect for authority anymore." Catherine shifted slightly, something in his tone making her uncomfortable. "Derek, what did she do?" "She came in with some ethnic hairstyle," he said, the disdain clear in his voice. "All these beads and whatnot. I told her to fix it. Can't have students thinking Westridge is some kind of free-for-all. Catherine's brow furrowed. Was it against dress code? Derek's jaw tightened, irritation flashing across his face. It's about respect and professionalism, Catherine. Standards. You wouldn't understand, you didn't go to Westridge. We have a legacy to uphold. Before Catherine could respond, Derek's phone buzzed on the coffee table. An email notification lit up the screen. Principal Kenneth Hutchinson. Subject line: need to see you first thing tomorrow. Derek glanced at it and shrugged, setting his phone back down. Probably about the history department budget, he said, completely unconcerned. We've been trying to get funding for that new curriculum. He had no idea. No idea that at that exact moment, Jessica Chen was sitting in her bedroom, Amara's permission secured, uploading a video that would destroy him. Jessica's fingers trembled slightly as she typed out the caption. My friend was told her natural hair is inappropriate at our school. This is discrimination. Hashtag Crown Act. Hashtag Westridge. Hashtag Black Girl Magic. She hesitated for just a moment, her thumb hovering over the post button. Then she thought of Amara's face in that bathroom. Trinity's confession about her braids. Zoe's story about her accent. All the girls who'd been made to feel less than because of who they were. She hit post. At first, nothing happened. The video sat there, just another post in the endless scroll of TikTok content. 10 views. 25. 50. Jessica refreshed the page. 130. Then something shifted. 200. 500. The number started climbing faster. 1,000 views. People were commenting, sharing, stitching the video with their own reactions. 2,000. 5,000. The algorithm had picked it up. 10,000 views. Former Westridge students started flooding the comments section. And what they had to say made Jessica's blood run cold. One comment read, "Oh my God, Morrison is still doing this? He gave me a C on my Black History Month presentation about Malcolm X 3 years ago. Said I was being too radical. I was literally just presenting historical facts." Another, "I graduated in 2019. He once said in class that slavery wasn't as bad as people make it out to be. When I challenged him, he sent me to the principal's office for being disruptive." A former student wrote, "He told me my locks were unprofessional during career day. I'm now a doctor at Johns Hopkins. Still have my locks. They didn't stop me from saving lives." 50,000 views. 100,000. The stories kept coming. A pattern emerging from years of silence. Years of students who'd been too afraid, too isolated, too worried about their futures to speak up. 200,000 views. Local news stations started calling the school. Education reporters were watching. Advocacy groups were sharing. 500,000 views. The hashtags were trending. Justice for Amara. Westridge accountability. National civil rights organizations were taking notice. By midnight, the video had passed 1 million views. By 2 in the morning, 2 million. Comments were coming in faster than anyone could read them. The story had broken containment. This wasn't just about one teacher and one student anymore. This was about every black child who'd ever been told their natural hair was unprofessional. Every student of color who'd been made to feel like they didn't belong. Every young person who'd been forced to choose between their identity and their education. Derek Morrison slept peacefully that night, completely unaware that his entire world was collapsing around him. The next morning, Tuesday, Principal Kenneth Hutchinson arrived at his office at 6:30 a.m., which was unusual for him. He preferred to stroll in around 8, coffee in hand, ready for a predictable day of administrative tasks. But his phone had been ringing since 5 a.m. Board members, parents, the superintendent. By 7 a.m. his office looked like a war room. His secretary fielded call after call. The phone literally would not stop ringing. Board members were demanding answers. Donors were threatening to pull funding. Parents were outraged, though they were split down the middle on which side of the outrage they fell. And then she walked in. Dr. Patricia Lewis, the district superintendent. She was a black woman in her 50s who'd spent 30 years in education, working her way up from classroom teacher to the highest position in the district. She'd seen everything, handled everything. But the look on her face that morning told Hutchinson this was different. She didn't wait for pleasantries. She dropped her tablet on his desk, the video already queued up. "We have a Crown Act violation, Kenneth. This isn't going away." Hutchinson, whose primary concern had always been the school's reputation and his own career advancement, started making excuses immediately. "Derek's been here 15 years. He's never had a formal complaint. He's beloved by alumni. His family has deep ties to this institution." Dr. Lewis's expression didn't change. She slid her tablet toward him, showing him something else. Screenshots. Hundreds of them. That's because students were afraid to make them, she said, her voice hard. Read these. Testimonial after testimonial from former students. Stories dating back years. A pattern of discrimination so clear, so documented, that there was no way to deny it. Comments about hair. About accents. About skin tone. About names that were too difficult to pronounce, so he'd just call students by their last names. About presentations on Black history being marked down for being too political. About discussions of systemic racism being shut down in a class that was supposed to be teaching history. The school's lawyer was already on speakerphone, his voice tight with concern. You need to investigate immediately. This is a legal liability. The Crown Act is state law. If Morrison violated it, and from this video it's clear he did, the school could face serious consequences. Lawsuits. Federal investigations. Loss of accreditation if this is deemed part of a pattern of discrimination. Hutchinson's face had gone pale. But Dr. Lewis cut him off. I don't care about Derek's legacy. I don't care about his family's donations. I care about the law and about the students we're supposed to protect. You need to suspend him immediately pending a full investigation. And Kenneth? This is happening whether you cooperate or not. So I suggest you get on the right side of this. While Westridge Academy's administration scrambled to contain the crisis, Amara woke up to a different kind of chaos. Her phone had died sometime around midnight while she was researching. When she plugged it in and turned it on that Tuesday morning, it exploded with notifications. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Messages from people she'd never met. Instagram DMs. Twitter mentions. Her email inbox was overflowing. But more importantly, there were messages from people who mattered. The local NAACP chapter had reached out, offering support and resources. Civil rights organizations wanted to talk to her. News stations wanted interviews. And then there was one email that stood out from all the rest. It was from a man named James Crawford. He was 63 years old, a civil rights attorney who'd been practicing for nearly 40 years. He'd worked on school desegregation cases in the 70s. He'd fought housing discrimination in the 80s. He'd taken on police brutality cases in the 90s and 2000s. And now, in what he'd thought might be his retirement years, he'd seen Amara's story and he couldn't look away. His email was simple. Miss Thompson, my name is James Crawford. I'm a civil rights attorney, and I'd like to offer you pro bono representation. What happened to you is illegal and you have every right to fight it. If you're interested, please call me at the number below. Amara sat on her bed, phone in hand, trying to process everything. The video had done what she'd been too afraid to do. It had forced people to pay attention, to see what had been happening in the shadows for years. She heard the front door open. Her mother Diana, finally home after a brutal double shift at the hospital, her scrubs wrinkled, her eyes exhausted. She'd been on her feet for 16 hours, dealing with emergencies and saving lives. She walked into Amara's room to check on her daughter before collapsing into bed. But the moment she saw Amara's face, she knew something had happened. And then she saw the phone. The notifications. The news articles already being written. Diana sat down heavily on the bed and Amara showed her everything. The video. The comments. The outpouring of support and the inevitable hate. The attorney's email. All of it. Diana Thompson broke down. This strong woman who'd raised 2 children alone, who'd worked herself to exhaustion to give them opportunities she'd never had, who'd survived poverty and loss and every obstacle life had thrown at her, she broke down. Baby, I'm so sorry, she said, tears streaming down her face. I sent you to that school thinking you'd be safe. Thinking you'd have opportunities. I thought if I could just get you through those doors, everything would be okay. Amara grabbed her mother's hands, holding them tight. Mama, you gave me the best education you could. This isn't your fault. You did everything right. He's the one who did wrong. Diana looked at her daughter, this brilliant, brave 16-year-old who'd been forced to grow up too fast, and asked the question that mattered most. What do you want to do, baby? Amara didn't hesitate. I want to make sure he can't do this to anyone else. Trinity took out her braids because of him. Zoe changed her voice. How many other girls changed themselves because they thought they had to? How many others are there that we don't even know about? That afternoon, the 3 of them, Amara, Diana, and Marcus, sat together in their small living room for a Zoom call with James Crawford. The attorney's face filled the screen, and despite the seriousness of the situation, there was kindness in his eyes. He explained Amara's rights clearly and thoroughly. The Crown Act made what Morrison did illegal. The video was clear evidence. The testimonials from other students established a pattern. The school had a legal obligation to act. If they didn't, there would be consequences. He talked about potential outcomes. Morrison could be fired. He should be fired. The school might face federal investigation. There could be policy changes. But he was also honest about the challenges. These cases can be difficult, he said. There will be people who defend him, who say you're making too much of this, who try to discredit you. It won't be easy. Amara listened to everything, then asked one question. Will this help other students? Will this make it so the next black girl who walks into that school doesn't have to go through what I went through? Mr. Crawford smiled. Yes. If we do this right, yes it will. That was all Amara needed to hear. Outside Westridge Academy, news vans were already setting up. Reporters checking equipment, preparing for the story that was dominating local headlines. Students arriving for school found themselves walking past cameras, being asked for comments, seeing their private institution suddenly thrust into very public scrutiny. And Amara made a decision. She was going to school. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't ashamed. She got dressed in her uniform, every piece regulation perfect. And she carefully, deliberately, styled her hair in those same beautiful bantu knots, every wooden bead in place exactly where her grandmother would have wanted them. Diana hugged her daughter tight before she left. You're so brave, she whispered. Marcus hugged her too. You look like a queen, he said, just like he had the day before. Except this time, the weight of those words was different. Amara walked toward the entrance of Westridge Academy, her head held high, those beads catching the morning light. Cameras flashed. Reporters called out questions. But she also saw something else. Students gathering. Trinity was there, her box braids on full display. Zoe stood beside her. Jessica held a sign that read, "Our hair is not a distraction." Dozens of students, black, white, Asian, Latino, standing together. They'd been silent for so long. Isolated in their individual experiences of discrimination and microaggressions. But Amara's courage had given them permission to speak. To stand. To say enough. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to do something. If you believe that every student deserves to show up as their authentic self without fear, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens in the next part of this story will restore your faith in justice. Here's my question for you. Have you or someone you know ever been discriminated against because of your natural appearance? Share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Because what Amara was about to walk into would change everything. Not just for her. Not just for Westridge Academy. But for every student who'd ever been told they needed to be someone different to belong. Derek Morrison's Tuesday morning started the way it always did. Alarm at 6:15. Shower. Expensive suit, perfectly pressed. Coffee from his high-end espresso machine. He scrolled through his phone while he drank it, already mentally preparing for what he assumed would be a routine meeting with Principal Hutchinson about department budgets. But when he pulled into the Westridge Academy parking lot at 7:45, something was wrong. News vans. 3 of them, satellite dishes extended, cameramen setting up equipment. Reporters doing sound checks. Morrison's first thought was that something had happened to a student. An accident maybe. A tragedy. He parked his car, grabbed his leather briefcase, and that's when he noticed people staring at him. A reporter actually pointed in his direction. Confused, he pulled out his phone to check if there'd been some emergency alert he'd missed. And that's when he saw it. 47 missed calls. His email inbox had exploded overnight. 312 unread messages. Text messages filling his screen. His heart started pounding as he scrolled through them. And then he saw the video. Jessica Chen's TikTok post, now with over 3 million views. The thumbnail was his face, frozen in a moment of condescension as he stood over Amara's desk. He clicked play with trembling fingers and his own voice filled his ears. This is a place of learning, Miss Thompson, not a cultural showcase. The color drained from Derek Morrison's face. The comment section was a nightmare. Thousands upon thousands of people calling him a racist, a bigot, demanding he be fired. Former students sharing their own stories. Current students he thought respected him describing incidents he barely remembered. His hands were actually shaking. His phone buzzed. Principal Hutchinson. Report to my office immediately upon arrival. Morrison walked through the main entrance of Westridge and for the first time in 15 years, he felt what his students of color must have felt every single day. Eyes watching. Whispers following. Judgment. The administrative assistant who usually greeted him warmly wouldn't make eye contact. The hallway seemed longer than usual. He reached the principal's office and knocked. Come in, Hutchinson's voice called, and it lacked its usual friendly warmth. Morrison opened the door and stopped cold. This wasn't the casual budget meeting he'd expected. Principal Hutchinson sat behind his desk, but he wasn't alone. Dr. Patricia Lewis, the district superintendent, sat in the chair beside him. Both their expressions were grave, professional, cold. Derek, Hutchinson began, his voice careful and measured, "We need to talk about yesterday's incident with Amara Thompson." Morrison's defensive instincts kicked in immediately. "It was a simple dress code issue blown out of proportion," he said, his voice taking on that same dismissive tone he'd used with Amara. "You know how social media is. Kids today turn everything into a crisis." Dr. Lewis didn't move. Didn't blink. She let him finish, and then she spoke, and her voice had the weight of 30 years in education behind it. "Mr. Morrison, you violated state law. The Crown Act specifically protects students from exactly this type of discrimination." Morrison actually laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "Discrimination? I never mentioned race. I was enforcing professional standards that apply to all students." Dr. Lewis leaned forward. "You targeted a black student's natural hair. You told her that her bantu knots and the beads her grandmother gave her were inappropriate for an academic environment. You called her natural hair a political statement and a cultural showcase. That is textbook race-based discrimination." "This is ridiculous," Morrison said, his voice rising. "I've dedicated 15 years to this school. I've taught hundreds of students. I've never had a complaint filed against me. You know my family's history here, Kenneth. You know the Morrison name means something at Westridge." Hutchinson shifted uncomfortably. "That's actually not true, Derek. About the complaints. We've had concerns before. Comments from students that were troubling. But they were never formalized. Never documented." Dr. Lewis slid a folder across the desk. "In the last 18 hours, we've received 43 formal statements from current and former students detailing a pattern of discriminatory behavior spanning your entire tenure here." 43, Mr. Morrison. "And that's just the beginning." Morrison's hands gripped the arms of his chair. "You can't do this. My family founded the Morrison Scholarship Fund. We've donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to this institution." Dr. Lewis's expression didn't change. "Which is why this is particularly disappointing. But your family's financial contributions don't exempt you from the law or from basic human decency. Effective immediately, you're being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation." "Administrative leave?" Morrison stood up, his face flushing red. "You can't do this to me." "We can," Dr. Lewis said calmly, "and we are. You need to leave campus immediately. You're not to contact any students, not to come to any school events, not to set foot on this property until the investigation is concluded. Do you understand?" Morrison looked at Hutchinson, expecting support, expecting the camaraderie of 15 years of working together. But Hutchinson wouldn't meet his eyes. "Derek, you need to go," was all he said. Derek Morrison left that office in a daze. The walk back through the building felt like a perp walk. Students stared openly now. Some whispered. A few pulled out phones. By the time he reached his car, a reporter had approached him asking for comment. He ignored them all, got in his vehicle, and drove away from Westridge Academy for what he didn't yet know would be the last time. Back at the school, word of Morrison's suspension spread like wildfire. By second period, everyone knew. The student body fractured along predictable lines. Some students were relieved, validated, feeling like maybe their voices mattered after all. Others were defensive, uncomfortable with the disruption to their comfortable world. But a group of students, mostly black and other students of color along with their allies, decided that silence wasn't an option anymore. They organized quickly using group chats and social media, and by lunchtime, over 200 students had gathered in the main quad. Trinity Washington stood on one of the stone benches, a megaphone in her hand that someone had grabbed from the athletics department. Her voice rang out across the courtyard. "We stand with Amara." She shouted, and the crowd echoed it back. "We stand with Amara." One by one, students stepped forward to share their own stories. A senior named Marcus Chen, Jessica's cousin, talked about how Morrison had told him to be less ethnic when he'd given a presentation on Chinese New Year traditions for a cultural diversity assignment. "Be less ethnic," he repeated, his voice breaking. "In a diversity assignment." A junior named Carlos Rodriguez described how Morrison had questioned his immigration status during a discussion about border policy, insinuating he might be undocumented. "I was born in Chicago," Carlos said into the megaphone. "My family's been in Illinois for 4 generations. But because my last name is Rodriguez and I have an accent from growing up bilingual, he assumed I didn't belong here." Jessica Chin read statistics about hair discrimination that she'd researched the night before. In a 2019 study, Black women were 1.5 times more likely to be sent home from work because of their hair. Black students are more likely to face disciplinary action for dress code violations related to natural hair. The Crown Act exists because this discrimination is real, pervasive, and damaging. And then the crowd parted. Amara Thompson walked through the pathway students created for her, and you could hear the collective intake of breath. She'd come. Despite everything. Despite the trauma and the fear and the very real possibility that this could all backfire. She'd come to school with her head held high and every single beat in place. Trinity handed her the megaphone. The quad went silent. Over 200 students, plus teachers watching from windows, plus news cameras capturing everything from beyond the school gates. All eyes on this 16-year-old girl who just wanted to learn without having to sacrifice her identity. Amara's hands shook as she held the megaphone. Her voice, when it came, was quiet at first, trembling. "I don't know what to say," she began. "I'm not used to people listening." Someone in the crowd shouted, "We're listening now." Amara took a breath and her voice grew stronger. "My grandmother gave me these beads. She told me they connect me to my ancestors. To women who survived the Middle Passage. To women who endured slavery and Jim Crow and still held their heads high. She told me my hair was my crown, and I should never let anyone make me ashamed of it." Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. "Yesterday, Mr. Morrison told me that my crown was inappropriate. That it was a distraction. That it was a political statement. But I'm not making a political statement by existing as I am. I'm just existing." Students were crying now. Trinity had tears streaming down her face. Even some of the white students who'd been defensive earlier looked uncomfortable, confronted with the raw emotion of someone their own age. "I'm not asking for special treatment," Amara continued, her voice ringing out across the quad now. "I'm asking for equal treatment. I'm asking to be judged by my 4.0 GPA, by my debate championships, by my character and my work ethic. Not by whether my hair makes someone uncomfortable." The crowd erupted. Someone started chanting, "Crown Act! Crown Act!" Within seconds 200 voices joined in. "Crown Act! Crown Act! Crown Act!" The news cameras captured everything. This wasn't just a story about one teacher's discrimination anymore. This was a movement. A generation of students saying enough. We won't be quiet. We won't make ourselves smaller. We won't accept that our natural existence is somehow wrong. Over the next week, the investigation unfolded with brutal efficiency. The school board convened emergency hearings. Current students testified, their voices shaking but determined. Former students flew in from across the country to share their experiences. Each testimony added another layer to the pattern of discrimination that Derek Morrison had woven throughout his career. But the most damaging evidence came from Morrison's own words. The IT department, under orders from the school board, pulled his email records. And what they found was devastating. An email from 3 years ago to another teacher. "The scholarship program is lowering our standards. We're accepting students who don't fit the Westridge culture." Another from 18 months ago. "I miss when Westridge students actually looked like Westridge students." A message from just 6 months prior, complaining about a Black History Month assembly. "Do we really need to dedicate so much time to this? We're supposed to be teaching history, not activism." Each email was a window into Morrison's true beliefs. Beliefs he'd been careful to mask in public, but that had leaked out in what he thought were private conversations. The evidence was overwhelming. At home, Derek Morrison's life was falling apart. His wife Catherine had seen the video. Read the testimonials. Looked at the husband she'd been married to for 12 years and realized she didn't know him at all. She confronted him in their expensive townhouse, her voice cold with a fury he'd never heard before. "Derek, who are you? This isn't who I thought I married. How could you treat a child like that? How could you say those things?" Morrison tried to defend himself. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. These kids today, they don't respect authority. They think everything is about race." Catherine cut him off. "Everything is about race when you're making it about race, Derek. That girl's hair had nothing to do with learning. You made it about race. You targeted her because she's Black." "I did no such thing," Morrison insisted, but even he could hear how hollow it sounded. His lawyers advised him to stay quiet, to wait for the investigation to conclude, to hope for the best. But the teachers' union, after reviewing the evidence, issued a statement that they couldn't defend what was clearly a violation of state law. Morrison was alone. Finally, 3 weeks after that fateful Monday morning, the emergency school board meeting convened. The auditorium was packed. Every seat filled. Media cameras lined the back wall. The meeting was live-streamed, watched by thousands of people who'd followed Amara's story. In the front row sat Amara Thompson and her mother Diana. Beside them, Mr. James Crawford, the civil rights attorney who'd taken on her case pro bono. Amara wore her school uniform and her beads. Diana held her daughter's hand tight. The board members filed in, their expressions carefully neutral. They'd spent hours reviewing evidence, reading testimonials, consulting with lawyers. The board chair, a woman named Margaret Sullivan who'd served for 20 years, called the meeting to order. Mr. Crawford presented Amara's case with the skill of someone who'd fought these battles for 4 decades. He walked through the timeline. The discrimination. The Crown Act violation. The pattern of behavior. The impact on students. He was thorough, methodical, devastating. Board members asked questions. They reviewed video evidence. They read through student testimonials out loud, and with each one the picture became clearer. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was systemic. This was a teacher who'd been allowed to discriminate for years because students were too afraid to speak up. Finally, Derek Morrison was given a chance to speak. He stood at the podium, his expensive suit looking rumpled now, his face gaunt from weeks of stress. He read from a prepared statement and every word felt hollow. "If I offended anyone, that wasn't my intention," he said, the classic non-apology. "I've dedicated my career to education. I've always tried to maintain high standards for all students, regardless of background. If my words were misinterpreted, I apologize for any hurt feelings that may have resulted." Amara sat in the front row, listening to him refuse to take real responsibility, and she felt Diana's hand squeeze hers tighter. The board chair thanked Morrison for his statement and dismissed him. The board members stood and filed into a private room to deliberate. The clock on the wall showed 7:33 p.m. 4:27 minutes, that auditorium was silent except for the ticking of that clock. People shifted in their seats, checked their phones, waited. Amara stared at the empty board table, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. At 8 p.m. exactly, the board members filed back in. Margaret Sullivan took her seat, adjusted her microphone, and the room held its collective breath. After thorough investigation, she began, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium, reviewing extensive evidence including video documentation, email records, and testimony from 47 current and former students. "This board has reached a unanimous decision." She paused, looking directly at where Morrison sat in the back corner. "We find that Mr. Derek Morrison violated school policy, violated state law under the Crown Act, and violated the civil rights of multiple students over the course of his 15-year tenure at Westridge Academy." The room erupted in whispers. Sullivan held up her hand for silence. "Effective immediately, Mr. Morrison's employment with Westridge Academy is terminated. Furthermore, he is permanently banned from campus and from all school-related activities. The Morrison Scholarship Fund will be renamed the Diversity and Inclusion Scholarship Fund, with a new mission to support students from underrepresented backgrounds." The auditorium exploded. Applause. Tears. Students hugging each other. Amara felt her mother collapse against her shoulder, sobbing with relief. Mr. Crawford squeezed Amara's other hand, a small smile on his weathered face. In the back corner, Derek Morrison sat frozen. Anger. Disbelief. His legacy family status, his 15 years of service, his family's money, none of it had saved him. For the first time in his life, he'd faced real consequences for his actions. He stood, stumbled toward the exit, and walked out of Westridge Academy for the last time. No one stopped him. No one said goodbye. 2 weeks later, Westridge Academy looked different. Felt different. The school had implemented mandatory bias training for all staff. Every teacher, every administrator, every staff member had to complete a comprehensive program on implicit bias, cultural competency, and inclusive education. A new policy was formally adopted, explicitly protecting natural hairstyles and all forms of cultural expression. It was written in clear, unambiguous language. No student would ever again be told their natural hair was inappropriate. And the Morrison Scholarship Fund, renamed as the board had ordered, now specifically prioritized students from underrepresented communities. The very fund that Derek Morrison's family had created to cement their legacy was now actively working to undo the kind of discrimination he'd perpetuated. In AP History class, a new teacher stood at the front of the room. Ms. Angela Brooks was a black woman in her early 30s with beautiful natural locks that fell past her shoulders. She'd been hired as Morrison's permanent replacement, and her approach to teaching was radically different. When she covered the civil rights movement, she didn't just recite facts from a textbook. She brought in personal narratives. She connected historical struggles to present-day issues. She created space for students to share their own experiences and perspectives. Amara sat in the front row, the same seat she'd always occupied, and participated confidently. When Ms. Brooks asked a question about the lasting impact of discriminatory policies, Amara's hand shot up. She spoke eloquently about institutional racism, about the importance of laws like the Crown Act, about how change requires both policy and cultural shifts. After class, as students filed out, Ms. Brooks called out to Amara. "Miss Thompson, could I speak with you for a moment?" Amara approached the desk and Ms. Brooks smiled warmly. "Beautiful beads," she said simply. "Thank you, Ms. Brooks," Amara replied, her voice steady and proud. "My grandmother gave them to me. She sounds like she was a wise woman." She was. But Amara's impact extended beyond her own classroom. She'd started meeting with younger students, particularly freshmen who were just beginning their journey at Westridge. She mentored them, shared her story, encouraged them to speak up when they faced discrimination or bias. Trinity and Zoe joined her. Together, they formed a student advocacy group focused on inclusion and equity. They worked with the administration, not against it, to make real, lasting change. That night, Amara sat at her desk and opened her journal. The same journal where she'd written, just weeks ago, Day 127 at Westridge. "Still feels like I'm proving I belong here." Now she wrote something different. Day 154 at Westridge. "Today I feel like I truly belong. Not because I changed. Not because I made myself smaller or more acceptable. But because I fought for the space to be myself. Because I refused to let someone else's prejudice define my worth. Because I stood up, spoke out, and wore my crown." The following Saturday, Amara visited her grandmother's grave. She knelt in the grass, placed fresh flowers on the headstone, and touched the beads in her hair. "I wore my crown, Grandma," she whispered. "And I didn't let anyone take it from me." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, Amara could swear she felt her grandmother's hand on her shoulder. "Now here's what you need to know. The Crown Act has been passed in 24 states. That means there are still 26 states where discrimination based on natural hair is still legal. 26 states where students like Amara can be told their hair is inappropriate, unprofessional, or a distraction. 26 states where children are forced to choose between their cultural identity and their education. If you've experienced hair discrimination, you're not alone. Thousands of people have shared their stories. Their voices matter. Your voice matters. Stand up. Speak out. Wear your crown. Because change doesn't happen in silence. It happens when brave people like Amara Thompson decide that enough is enough. When they refuse to accept discrimination as normal. When they fight not just for themselves but for everyone who comes after them. Amara Thompson is a junior at Westridge Academy. She maintains a 4.0 GPA. She's captain of the debate team. She dreams of becoming a civil rights attorney. And she wears her beads with pride every single day. Derek Morrison is no longer a teacher. His career is over. His legacy is tarnished. And every student who walks through Westridge Academy's gates knows that discrimination has consequences. If this story moved you, if you believe that every student deserves to be seen, valued, and protected, share this video. Tell someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like Amara's are happening every single day, and the only way we stop them is by refusing to be silent. What do you think should happen to educators who discriminate against students? Should there be a national version of the Crown Act? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Stand up. Speak out. Wear your crown.